What if I told you the most powerful years of Jesus' life were erased? We know his birth. We know his death. But 18 entire years are missing. Not a single gospel explains it. Not one priest talks about it. And no church dares to ask, where did he go, and why is there only silence? This isn't just a historical gap. It's a buried truth. And buried truths always have a reason, because silence can be manufactured. But what if Jesus never disappeared at all? What if he walked, taught, and healed far from Rome, deep in the heart of Africa? And what if the record of those years was never lost, but preserved, in a Bible the Western world never wanted you to read? A Bible with 88 books. A Bible kept alive in the highlands of Ethiopia. Untouched, uncolonized, unedited. This isn't fiction. It's not a fringe theory. This is the gospel before empires rewrote it. Stay with me, because once you hear what's inside, you will never see Jesus the same way again. And if you're ready to question the history you were handed, subscribe to Mind and Heart in Harmony right now and turn on notifications, because this is just the beginning. Right now, I want you to do something powerful. Go down to the comments and type this sentence. Today, I open my mind to the truth. By writing it, you're not just supporting this channel. You're making a commitment to yourself on a journey of discovery. Do it right now, and let's begin. From age 12 to 30, Jesus, the central figure of Christianity, vanishes completely from the pages of the Bible. This isn't a simple omission. It's an act of cosmic censorship. It's a chasm. 18 entire years, the most formative period of a human life, are torn from the record. These are the years when a young man forges his identity, wrestles with his doubts, discovers his purpose, and ignites the inner fire that will define him forever. And the Bible on your shelf simply rips that chapter out without explanation. The official story leaps across this void with suspicious agility, leaving an unexplainable gap between the child prodigy and the divine prophet. But silence is rarely empty. Sometimes silence is a wall, built brick by brick, to hide what's on the other side. Sometimes silence isn't an absence of noise. It's a declaration of power. Think about it with the intensity it deserves. At age 12, the Gospel of Luke gives us one last dazzling image. Jesus in the heart of religious power, the temple in Jerusalem. He isn't hiding. He is at the center of it all, sitting among the doctors of the law, men with gray beards who had dedicated their entire lives to the scriptures. And this boy doesn't just listen. He interrogates them. He doesn't just answer. He challenges them with a wisdom so profound it leaves them speechless, astonished, and most likely deeply unsettled. We see a flame that is already burning with an intensity that threatens to consume the old structure. And then, right at that climax, nothing. The narrative is cut with surgical precision. The next time we see him, nearly 2 decades have passed, and he appears before John the Baptist at the Jordan River. Are we really meant to believe that for 18 years, nothing worth mentioning happened? That this divine flame simply lay dormant while the Son of God worked quietly as a carpenter, patiently waiting for a cue? That is the narrative of domestication. It's a simple, safe, and above all passive story. But it's not just improbable. It's historically impossible. In the Hebrew culture of the time, a boy became a man at 13 with his bar mitzvah. The brightest rabbis, trained in the schools of Hillel and Shammai, began teaching by 15. Revolutionaries like the Zealots began organizing in their 20s. Judea was a hotbed of theological debate and political fervor. And an intellect like his stayed on the sidelines. It's unthinkable. If Jesus began his public ministry at 30, it means he spent almost 2 decades actively preparing for it. The real question isn't what he did, but why a force so powerful decided we should never know. The truth, an inconvenient truth, is that the early church wasn't silent. The first few centuries of Christianity were buzzing with stories. They were filled with vibrant writings, Gnostic Gospels, Coptic texts, and oral traditions that spoke of Jesus as a child, a teenager, and a young man who healed, studied, traveled, and taught long before his baptism. Manuscripts like the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, now ejected from the official canon, describe these forgotten seasons in fascinating and, for the powerful, deeply disturbing detail. But over time, as the shadow of the Roman eagle fell across the cross, these accounts were systematically hunted down and eliminated. The Council of Nicaea in 325 AD was not a spiritual summit. It was a political one. Under the watchful eye of Emperor Constantine, a man who sought imperial unity above divine truth, it was decided what was faith and what was heresy. A final, official list of books was authorized. Everything else was branded with the hot iron of the forbidden. Dozens of texts, alternative memories, and dissenting traditions were rejected. And many weren't just banned. They were burned, turned to ash so their stories could never again challenge the official narrative. Why? Because a Jesus who waited silently until 30 is a Jesus you can control. He's a Christ who blesses the empire, not one who judges it. He's a model of patience and obedience that fits perfectly into a power structure. But a Jesus who acted on his own, who traveled to distant lands, who learned from other wisdom, and who challenged the religious order from his youth. That Jesus is dangerous. That Jesus is uncontrollable. That Jesus is free. And no empire can own a free man. So the safest route for power, not for truth, was silence. A calculated, imposed, and fiercely defended silence. The question then echoes through the centuries. Who benefits when the Messiah's youth is erased? Who gains power when history is edited and mystery is tamed? But that silence, that nearly 2,000-year-old silence, is about to be broken. While Rome was building its version of the faith in halls of marble, with political decrees and controlled councils, in another corner of the world, a fortress of memory stood firm. In the high mountains of Ethiopia, the complete story was kept alive. Ethiopia didn't just preserve the faith, it preserved the entire library, the time capsule of an unedited Christianity. Its Bible doesn't stop at the 66 books the Western world knows. Contains 88. A vast and ancient treasure that stands as a silent testament to everything that was erased. This isn't just a longer Bible. It's a parallel universe. It's a different lens through which to see God, a different memory of what salvation means, a fundamentally different Christianity. And within the leather-bound pages of this ark of texts, you find the books that Western churches branded with the hot iron of the forbidden. Books deemed dangerous, yet embraced as sacred by one of the oldest and purest Christian communities in the world. Let's talk about the Book of Enoch. A text so ancient it whispers from a time before Abraham. A manuscript found in the caves of Qumran, among the Dead Sea Scrolls, proving it was revered by devout Jews in Jesus' time. A text quoted directly, word for word, by the Apostle Jude in the New Testament. And yet, it was hunted down, buried, and forgotten by the West. Why? Because Enoch is not a story. It's a theological earthquake. It unleashes a cosmology that Rome could not control or domesticate. It speaks of angels, divine beings called the Watchers, who betrayed their heavenly post, corrupting humanity with forbidden knowledge. It speaks of the Nephilim, giants born of unholy unions who filled the world with violence and chaos. It speaks of a cosmic judgment coming not just for humans, but for the heavenly powers themselves. And most dangerous of all, it reveals a messianic figure, the Son of Man, who has existed since before creation, long before Bethlehem. Now imagine what that means for an empire trying to be the center of the universe. A Messiah who doesn't need their history. A prophecy that predates their priests. That's not inconvenient. It's revolutionary. Then there's the Book of Jubilees, a text that accuses earthly power of the most audacious crime imaginable, the theft of divine time. It presents a heavenly calendar of 364 days, perfect and unchanging, revealed by angels, suggesting that even the way we measure our years was manipulated by human hands to fit pagan cycles and imperial models, throwing the sacred festivals out of alignment and, in essence, putting the world on a broken clock, out of sync with God. And the ascension of Isaiah. A vision so grand it dwarfs the nativity scenes we're used to. It speaks of a divine being, the beloved, voluntarily descending through the seven heavens, stripping off his glory layer by layer, hiding his true identity even from the angels of the lower realms, until he enters the world in the most profound and silent humility. These books are not simple stories. They connect Jesus to a Semitic prophetic tradition rooted in mystery, the cosmos, and spiritual warfare, not the logical, orderly, and political framework of the Greeks and Romans. In Ethiopia, the canon reflects a raw theology, unfiltered by councils, undiluted by the convenience of emperors. It keeps Jesus at the center of a cosmic drama far older and vaster than the Roman Empire itself. So the question rings out with terrifying clarity. Why did the Church of Rome declare these writings dangerous? Because they don't build a Messiah you can put in a display case. Because they don't support the idea that salvation is a bureaucratic system to be managed by an institution. They don't endorse the idea that truth must be approved by Rome. They show an untamable Christ who speaks directly to the oppressed, who condemns injustice both on earth and in the heavens, and who operates far, far from the palaces of power. A Jesus who doesn't need a pope's permission to be divine. And in Ethiopia that Jesus was never erased. In fact, it's in these forbidden texts that we find him doing things the official story prayed you would never know. The official story has a script, and in that script, Jesus's divine power activates at age 30. But what if that script is an edited version? What if the most stunning scenes were left on the cutting room floor? What if the first miracles didn't happen at a wedding, but at age 7 on a playground? What if the Son of God didn't just appear fully formed, but had been unleashing wonders since his hands were too small to hold a carpenter's tool? This is not a theory. This is exactly what the ancient Ethiopian texts and the Gospels declared forgotten by the official story claim. They speak of a different Jesus, the child in exile, a boy who breathes the dust of Egypt, who grows in the shadow of pyramids and mysteries, in a land with a wisdom that was ancient when Rome was just a village. The infancy gospel, preserved in the Ethiopian tradition, recounts these stories. And they don't feel like fables. They feel like forbidden memories. Imagine the scene. A group of children plays in the mud by a stream. They laugh, get dirty, their clumsy hands molding lifeless lumps of earth, trying to imitate birds and animals. Jesus is with them. But while the others mold, Jesus creates. He takes his clay bird, holds it in his palm and breathes on it. A soft breath, almost a whisper. And the figure, inert and cold, trembles and comes to life. Its mud wings flutter, and it soars into the sky, singing. It's not a trick. It's a miniature miracle. It's Genesis recreated in a children's game. The Creator playing in his own creation. But not all the stories were so serene. Unfiltered divine power is a force of nature. In another moment, the sounds of children's games are shattered by a scream of terror. A boy has fallen from a roof. The crowd runs, commotion grows, and then a deathly silence. The boy lies still, a broken body on the ground. And there, standing over him amidst the panic and grief, is Jesus. There is no spectacle, no tears in his eyes, just a terrifying calm. His voice, clear and filled with an incomprehensible authority, cuts through the air. He commands the boy to rise. Command, not a plea. And the boy obeys life itself. He gets up without delay, without confusion. Just one word from a child who was the Word. There are even more unsettling accounts. One tells of another boy who, out of jealousy, strikes Jesus. Moments later, that boy collapses and dies. Panic grips the parents, and Mary, his mother, begs her son. And Jesus, with a look that contains both the power of a god and the sorrow of a child, revives him. What do we do with a story like that? It shows a power so raw it's dangerous. Divinity without the filters of adult ministry. Now, ask yourself with complete honesty, why were these stories eliminated? Why were they deemed too dangerous to be told? Because they show us a Jesus who cannot be managed. A Jesus who cannot be put in a catechism. The child Jesus in these texts is not a passive figure waiting for a prophecy to be fulfilled. He is the prophecy in motion. The power isn't waiting to be activated. It's alive and overflowing. He is already awake, already aware, already altering the very fabric of reality. He speaks with angels. He knows who he is. And he acts, not with hesitation, but with the authority of one who knows the end from the beginning. For an empire, and later for an ecclesiastical structure that needed a Christ they could define, limit, and control, this was a theological nightmare. A child prophet who already commands the elements and holds absolute power over life and death is a fundamental threat. It's a power that needs no intermediaries. It needs no priests to be interpreted, no bishops to be validated, and no emperors to be legitimized. And most importantly, it shows us a child who lived, breathed, and acted among cultures and lands that the official Rome-centric narrative decided to simply ignore, or worse, erase completely. And it was in those forgotten lands, in those forbidden texts, that the truth found its refuge. While the history of Christianity in Europe was being forged in the fire of the Crusades, stained with the blood of the Inquisitions, and rewriting God in the image of its kings and popes, Ethiopia remains. It's a solitary testament, almost a miracle, an island of time, an ark of memory, untouched by the sword of Rome, never bowing to imperial theology. Long before the great Gothic cathedrals clawed at the European skies, long before Charlemagne was crowned by a pope in an effort to merge faith and empire, Ethiopia was already praying, already singing, already believing, and the way it received the gospel changes everything. It didn't arrive as a command from a throne, nor as the doctrine of a conqueror with a cross in one hand and a sword in the other. It came as a revelation on a dusty road, directly to an African royal official, as told in the Book of Acts. Pure transmission. No political middlemen. No imperial agenda. And herein lies the heart of its miracle, the reason this story is so revolutionary. Ethiopia was never colonized. Not its land, and more importantly, not its soul. Think about it. Colonization isn't just the conquest of a territory. It's the overwriting of a people's memory. Europe spread its gospel with steel and fire, often mixing scripture with supremacy. Nations were converted by force. Native cultures, with their own connections to the divine, were erased, their sacred texts burned, and Christ was reimagined through the eyes of the conquerors. But Ethiopia didn't need swords to believe. It didn't need emperors to convert. It didn't need a reformation to rediscover Christ, because it had never lost him. Its resistance was not with armies. It was with devotion. Instead of steel, they used ink and parchment. Instead of castle walls, they used the stone of the mountains to carve their churches. Instead of battle cries, they used the silence of prayer. They preserved their sacred canon not in golden chalices to impress the masses, but in the dampness of hidden caves and in the heart of monasteries that defy gravity. Every letter they traced was an act of quiet defiance against forgetting. This act of preservation makes them the only ancient Christian nation that never surrendered its gospel to the power of an empire. And it's because of this uninterrupted heritage that, to this day, in the remote and misty Ethiopian highlands, monks continue a sacred ritual. They sit by the flickering flame of a candle, hunched over animal skins, and copy these holy books by hand. They do so in Guizi, an ancient Semitic language older than the Latin Vulgate, the official Bible of Rome. Their Bible is not incomplete. Verses, pages were torn from our story. Not because those pages were false, but because they were too true, too free, too untamable. Not because God was silent, but because powerful men decided it was more convenient to silence him. And the reason these texts survived there in the heart of Africa is a truth so simple and so profound it shakes the foundations of all earthly power. The truth never needed, and will never need, an emperor's permission to be true. Close your eyes for a moment. Picture a man from 1st century Galilee. Craftsman. His skin bronzed and weathered by the unforgiving Middle Eastern sun. His hands rough and calloused from working with wood. His features unmistakably Semitic, those of a Jewish man of his land and his time, who spoke Aramaic and walked dusty roads. This is the portrait that history and anthropology paint for us. Now, open your eyes and look at the image seared into the minds of billions. An ethereal prince with porcelain skin, long, silky, light brown hair, and melancholy blue eyes. A figure more at home in the courts of Florence than on the rugged roads of Nazareth. How did this visual hijacking happen? How was the Jewish rabbi subjected to the most successful and enduring metamorphosis in history? The answer isn't a simple artistic license. The answer is strategy. It's power. It's propaganda. It is the politics of perception in its purest form. For the first few centuries, Christ's followers, rooted in Jewish tradition, avoided direct representations of his face. They did so out of reverence for the second commandment, which forbids graven images, and also out of constant fear of Roman persecution. When they did depict him, it was through secret symbols. A fish, an anchor, a lamb, a shepherd. They were visual whispers, not declarations of power. But everything changed when Christianity moved from the catacombs to the throne of the Roman Empire. The faith of the persecuted became the religion of power. And a humble, marginalized prophet no longer served the empire's purposes. Jesus needed a radical rebranding. He could no longer look like a dissident. He had to look like an emperor, a philosopher, a Roman god. The art of the time began to reflect this. A clean-shaven Jesus like Apollo, or one with the majestic beard of Zeus, dressed not in a peasant's tunic, but in the toga of a noble Roman citizen. But it was during the Renaissance that this transformation was not only completed, but perfected to an almost irrefutable status. Master artists like Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci, under the patronage of popes and princes like the Medici, didn't just paint Christ as a European. They painted him as the ideal of European beauty. They created a god in the image of their own ideal of human perfection. And these weren't just paintings. Thanks to the printing press and new engraving techniques, these images were copied, reproduced, and mass-distributed around the world. They became the definitive image, the accepted visual truth, erasing almost any other possibility from the global cultural mind. In doing so, European power wove a silent but incredibly potent lie. God looks like us. And if God looks like us, then we, our culture, our race, are closer to him. It's a visual theology of supremacy, a cultural weapon that justified centuries of colonialism and dominion. But thousands of miles away, in the rock-hewn churches and monasteries of Ethiopia, this visual lie never took root. Jesus was never painted with the skin of a conqueror. For over 1,700 years, their icons have portrayed him as a man with the features of his region, with dark skin and Eastern robes. They didn't do this as a political statement to make him look like them. They did it because their memory was never conquered. They simply remembered what others chose or were forced to forget. Their icons are not just art. They are an act of visual resistance. They are a testament to a truth that refused to be whitewashed. And this is of critical importance, because you cannot separate the message from the image. When you lose the true image of Christ, you begin to lose the essence of his true message. When you steal a people's image of their God, you begin to steal their own divinity. You tell them, silently, generation after generation, that holiness does not look like them. And that, perhaps, is the greatest heresy of all. This journey hasn't just been about the lost years of Jesus. It's been about the lost years in our own understanding. A history rewritten by empire and buried under centuries of conformity. The 18 years of silence were not an empty space. They were a protected memory. The forbidden texts were not false. They were dangerous to power. The original image of Jesus was not forgotten. It was replaced. But the good news isn't just that we were saved, but that we can awaken to what has always been there. Ethiopia didn't create a new truth. It simply guarded the old one, kept the mirror intact. It preserved the promise that the gospel never belonged to an empire, has always belonged to the people, all people. And that inheritance, your inheritance, was never lost. It was just hidden, waiting for you to be brave enough to look for it. We've opened one door, but the hallway of secrets is long. That's why I've created a playlist for you. A true knowledge marathon. Trust YouTube's intelligence. It will show you exactly the next discovery you need to make. The journey continues.